Hi Platypus, welcome to Platinum, where future topnotchers are made. I'm Carl Padua, and today we'll explore active transport, primary and secondary. Now come on and join me as we make our journey to Top 1. Before we dive into active transport, let's quickly recall passive transport, something you have encountered in biology or biochemistry. Since active transport is easier to understand when compared to passive processes, this quick review will help connect the two. We'll do a short activity called Which Way Does It Flow? Look at this image. What direction is the movement? Is energy needed? Passive or active? Right, this is passive transport. Now look at this. The molecule moves against the gradient, and you will notice the lightning bolt. This means energy is used. That brings us to today's topic, active transport.
Alright class, last time we talked about passive transport. So can anyone remind us what that means? Exactly. Now, let's move on to something different, the active transport. So can someone try to define it for us? Yes, good job. Active transport is the movement of substances against their concentration gradient. It's from low to high, and it requires energy, usually in the form of ATP. So here's its key characteristics.
So, it requires energy in the form of ATP. It moves from low to high concentration. It involves specific carrier proteins. It is highly selective and regulated. And lastly, it helps maintain homeostasis.
So now, how does this compare to a passive transport? So let's look at this chart. For example, passive transport uses channel proteins sometimes, but active transport always needs carrier proteins. Passive aims for equilibrium while active maintains the cell's internal balance. So now, here's a question for you. So why would a cell use energy just to move something across the membrane? Exactly! So active transport is essential for life. It empowers nerve signals, nutrient absorption, and keeps our cells in balance.
Next, we'll focus on how cells move substances using energy, a process called primary active transport. Now, picture trying to push water uphill. That's what this process does. It moves molecules from low to high concentration, which goes against the gradient. Can anyone remind us what we call movement with a concentration gradient? Exactly. Normally, substances move with a gradient from high to low, but in primary active transport, we're moving substances against that gradient, from low to high. Do you think this kind of movement needs energy? Correct, and that's where ATP comes in. ATP or adenosine triphosphate. ATP is the energy currency of the cell. In primary active transport, ATP is broken down to release energy. That energy is used to change the shape of the transport protein in the membrane. This shape is crucial. It's what allows the protein to push the substance across the membrane, even when it's already crowded on the other side. Let's go through this step by step. Here's the cell membrane, the transport protein, and a molecule. Let's say sodium ion on one side. First, the molecule binds to a specific site on the transport protein. Then, an ATP molecule attaches to the protein. ATP is hydrolyzed, it breaks down into ADP and PI, releasing energy. That energy causes the protein to change shape. This shape change pushes the molecule to the other side of the membrane. Then, the phosphate is released and the protein returns to its original shape. What happens to ATP during this process? Exactly. That breakdown powers the whole mechanism. Let's look at the sodium-potassium pump. This pump uses one ATP to move 3 sodium ions out of the cell and 2 potassium ions in. This pump helps with muscle contraction, nerve signaling, and maintaining cell volume. Why do you think pumping sodium and potassium in opposite direction is important for nerve cells? Exactly. It creates the electrical gradient needed for nerve signals. So remember, primary active transport is an energy-requiring process. It's how the cell moves molecules against the gradient with the help of ATP and transport proteins. It might seem microscopic, but this is how life works on the molecular level.
Now that we've covered primary active transport, we've seen how it uses ATP directly, like the sodium-potassium pump. But what if ATP isn't used directly? Can the cells still move substances against their gradient? Let's take a look. This pump pushes sodium out of the cell using ATP, creating a high concentration of sodium outside. That stored buildup forms what we call an electrochemical gradient, which contains potential energy. This is where secondary active transport comes in. It doesn't use ATP directly, instead, it relies on the sodium gradient created by primary transport. When the sodium moves back into the cell with its gradient, it brings another molecule along, such as glucose or amino acids. Here, sodium flows from high to low concentration with its gradient and pulls glucose into the cell, even though glucose is going against its gradient. Because sodium naturally wants to re-enter the cell, its movement provides the energy needed to bring the glucose in. Quick check, which molecule is helping glucose enter the cell? That's right, sodium. This process is called cotransport, where two molecules move together using gradient energy. Now let's break this into two types. Symporter, molecules move in the same direction. Antiporter is where molecules move in the opposite direction. So if sodium and glucose enter together through SGLT1, what kind of transporter is that? Correct, symporter. Now take a look at this. Sodium moves in, calcium moves out. What's that? That's right, it's called an antiporter. Let's classify a few more together. Sodium-hydrogen exchanger. That's right, it's called an antiport. And next, sodium amino acid transporter. Correct, symport. Awesome! That's how secondary active transport works. It depends on the gradient created by primary transport and uses that energy to help move other substances across the membrane.
Hello, good day everyone. So our lesson for today is all about physiological significance. So let's start with real life. Why is active transport important? 1. It allows your cell to get nutrients, send nerve impulses, and maintain their cell volume. Without it, your body wouldn't function properly. So our first segment will be nutrient absorption in the small intestine. So think about eating a candy bar. All that sugar doesn't just magically appear in your cells. It needs a doorway. So what is this doorway? So this doorway is called the SGLT1 symporter. It works like a tiny pump, pulling glucose and galactose into the bloodstream with the sodium ions. So this is a question for you guys. What happens if this symporter is not working? Exactly. Eating sugar won't help if the transporter isn't functioning. So you won't be getting the sugar rush basically. So let's move on to our second segment, which is the nervous system function. So if you pinch yourself, you feel pain, right? So have you ever wondered how do you feel this pain? Where is this coming from? How you move your muscles or how you think? That's the sodium and potassium ion pump at work again. So they're just basically like maintenance workers, constantly keeping your electrical balance in your nerves. So if it shuts down, there's no signal, movement, there's no nothing. So you won't feel pain, you won't be able to move your muscles, and you won't be able to think. The fourth segment will be the maintaining osmotic balance and cell volume. So cells are like water balloons. So if you don't control the water inside, it will be able to burst if it's too much or collapse if it's too less. So active transport ensures water balance by regulating the movement of the ion and preventing dangerous swelling or shrinkage. Yes, it's crucial to keep you alive. All that being said, let's proceed to our next lesson, which is the clinical correlates. These are examples of diseases linked to active transport dysfunction. So now let's talk about what happens when the system breaks down. There are really real diseases linked to problems with active transport. First is the cystic fibrosis. So cystic fibrosis happens because of the mutation of the CFTR protein. It is a chloride channel regulated by the active transport. This leads to sticky mucus in the lungs, making it hard to breathe. Exactly, you got that right. It would be making a person hard to breathe. Second disease would be congenital SGLT1 deficiency. So some babies are born without the ability to absorb glucose and galactose in the small intestine. So sugar stays in the gut, pulling water in and causing severe diarrhea. You got that right. So last but not the least, disease, heart failure, and digoxin. Lastly, let's look at digoxin. So it is a medication used in heart failure. It works by partially blocking the sodium ion and potassium ion pump, which can cause calcium to build up in cells. So what happens if calcium builds up in cells? This calcium makes the heart beat stronger, but we must take note that it must be used carefully. That's exactly right.
In summary, active transport is an important cellular function that requires energy to transfer substances across concentration gradients. It helps with nutrition absorption, signal transmission, and cellular homeostasis. Disruptions in these transport pathways can result in serious illness, including cystic fibrosis and diabetes, emphasizing their critical role in general health.
Now let's apply what you've learned through a quick scenario. I'll present a short case. You'll have 30 seconds to think and type your answer in the chat box or comment section. Now, in 1 to 2 sentences, describe your understanding of primary and secondary active transport and how they are connected. Let's see how well you've learned by answering this quick 5-item test. Ready? Main difference between primary and secondary active transport. Correct! Primary uses ATP directly, while secondary uses energy from an ion gradient. What provides energy for primary active transport? That's right, ATP. Disease caused by a malfunction in the CFTR chloride ion channel, causing breathing difficulties. Yes, it's cystic fibrosis. Type of secondary active transport, same direction movement. Exactly, it's symport. An active transport function which prevents cells from swelling or shrinking. Correct! Maintaining osmotic balance and cell volume. If you've answered everything correctly, then good job! But if not, don't worry, we'll keep practicing. For your assignment, using your notes and what we've talked about, try to fill in the missing information for each criterion. This will help you reinforce the key differences and similarities between the two mechanisms. And with that, we're done. I hope you've learned something valuable from us. Remember, strive, excel, succeed. This is Platinum, where future top-notchers are made. See you on the next review!